Hello and welcome to day 2 of IPAW. Yesterday we set the scene for the week by getting a feel for what's going on in the market, both what the data is telling us, but also what advisors are experiencing in their everyday working lives. We also discussed consumer duty and how critical illness and income protection can work together, before ending with our coaching session considering advisor mindset and how to get set up for successful client conversations. Thank you to everyone who took part in day 1, and if you missed it, we'll release a catch-up version and you'll find plenty of resources on our website iptf.co.uk. You can also see what points resonated with people by searching using the hashtag IPAW2024 on LinkedIn and Instagram. And speaking of hashtags, why not use them to post about the items that pique your interest today? So just as we did yesterday, we're going to start the day with some facts and figures to help give some context to why we do what we do. Today, we'll be looking at the advice process and how we get it right to ensure the best outcomes for clients. Why is this so important? Reports from IPTF members Legal and General and LV shed some light, as the infographic on screen shows. Let's start with debt, a topic that 71% of the working population are familiar with. There's a couple of real standout figures here. The first is regarding people's ability to repay a debt, with 10% of people with debt other than a mortgage unable to pay any of it back each month, and that's with a regular income coming in. Secondly, the stats highlighting the number of parents of young children already borrowing money from family. As advisors, "my family will support me" is often heard as a reason for not taking protection. How realistic is this, given they may already be providing support? The other often cited Plan B is savings, but thanks to the Deadline to Breadline report, we know that 16% of households don't have savings, and those who do have funds unlikely to last more than 3 months. The self-employed and parents of older children are particularly vulnerable when it comes to the prospect of relying on savings, another key point to remember in client conversations. All of the stats you can see on screen now show how vulnerable people are when it comes to withstanding an income shock, but perhaps even more worrying is the fact that many people are not even aware of just how vulnerable they would be if they were unable to work, with nearly a quarter of UK workers not even sure what their sick pay is. All of this is put into quite stark context by findings from LV's Reaching Resilience research published earlier this year, showing just why this matters. The average UK worker's income supports 3 people. Over half of working couples are reliant on both incomes, making the need for a Plan B even more important. Armed with all of this information, we encourage advisors to highlight to clients how, rather than being a grudge purchase, IP is a hero purchase, safeguarding all of those who rely on that income. Some pretty alarming stats there, which really highlight the importance of having effective conversations with clients that empower them to understand the risks that they face and know what a reliable Plan B looks like for them. So how do we make sure that our conversations with clients are as effective as possible? Well, one way is to avoid making mistakes which are going to jeopardise the path of the conversation and provide your client with an out. After the success of last year's objection handling session, still available on our website and YouTube channel if you need to catch up, it's probably no surprise that we've invited back one half of the Matt and Gary show, Matt Chapman, also the host of our podcast Let's Talk IP. Fear not, Gary's back too later in the week. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to highlight common mistakes and how to avoid them. What can we expect from today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here. It's exciting to be back. As you know, on my posts that I do on LinkedIn, so a lot of the coaching work that I do often is based around a lot of the mistakes that advisors are making, because often it's not that the client doesn't want the protection. It's not even that they're not interested in income protection, but unfortunately advisors, due to a number of different things, they have their own biases. They've got this fear of rejection. What they tend to do is offer the client what I call exit ramps, which is where unfortunately it's almost like they talk the client out of taking the cover for whatever reason. But also when they lack that conviction, that confidence, there's subtle changes to their tone of voice, their expression, and often it can end up feeling very much like a sales call or a sales pitch rather than a genuine advice conversation. So we're going to take a lot of those things that I've talked about on LinkedIn, some of those posts, those ideas that we've got, and really take it one stage further and look at what those conversations might do in terms of how it makes the customer feel, what the advisor's saying and why they're saying it. And then we'll teach some of the advisors what to do to how to avoid it and have better conversations with the customer to produce better outcomes.
Great. So I love how this session is living true to turning awareness into action this year. So let's get started then with section 1, which is baffling or confusing your client. So what sort of things might this include?
Well, this is where advisors tend to be very product focused or detail orientated. And unfortunately, what happens is when you do that so early on in the conversation without first doing the groundwork to create the need and create that intent with the customer or create value around the protection, you're bamboozling them with information, and often it creates this overload, and naturally the customer becomes very resistant because they feel like they're being persuaded to do something. So yeah, let's take a look and see how it goes.
And it's worth just saying that we have exaggerated things in these role plays. We're not saying that this is how an advice conversation does go.
You'd be surprised.
It's exaggerated to make the point, but let's take a look at our first role play.
Welcome, Stevie. You all right? Let's get started discussing what protection insurances you're going to want, such as IP, FIB, KIC, DTA and LTA, just to name a few of them. We've got so many great term assurances products, all starting from as little as £5 a month.
Okay, I didn't understand half what you said there and what any of those things mean. So maybe we could just start from the beginning. That'd be great.
Some people take out basic life insurance with their mortgage and think that's all they'll need. It's so much more complicated than that. IP is definitely the best place to start. Now, we just need to think about deferred periods. Benefit payment period, waiver premium, type of premium, your smoker status, your medical history, what you do for work, how much income benefit you'll need, whether you're going to need to get any policy exclusions, if you're going to get any ratings or premium loadings, then of course which provider, policy type, any value added benefits or policy additions you might be interested in.
Look, sorry, I didn't understand any of that. Deferred periods and IP. What even is that? Do we even need that?
Oh, IP or income protection insurance provides you with replacement income for a predetermined period of time. If you're unable to work due to illness or injury, subject to a qualifying claim, policies typically cover 60% of your gross income, dependent on your annual income sources, and which is then paid out monthly, starting from when your deferred period ends, and up to the end of your predetermined benefit period, or when you return to work, whichever comes first. But hey, don't worry about all the technical bits. That's what I'm here for. And all will become clear, or sort of clearer eventually. Now, let's get started generating some quotes, shall we? What you need depends on lots of different factors, such as your age, your health, your occupation, the deferred period, and your savings, the cover you need. For example, if you're 35 years old, a non-smoker, work in an office, a policy covering £2,000 a month with a 3-month deferred period might cost about £50 a month. But if you're a smoker, got a hazardous job, could be a lot more, because smoking's really bad for you, isn't it? Do you smoke?
No, I don't. Listen, can you at least tell me what is a deferred period again?
I'm sure I've already explained that. Weren't you listening? Okay, I'll go over it again. Look, the deferred period is the waiting time before the benefits start being paid from when you stop working. You can choose 4, 8, 13, 26, 52, 104, 260 weeks. The longer the deferred period, the less you pay usually. So a 4-week deferment period is usually more expensive than a 26-week deferment period, and so on. So what do you want to go for?
I mean, what are the other things you were saying as well that I need to think about?
Understood. Don't worry, I'll explain it all now. You need to choose the benefit period, how long your money will behave for you. So that's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, until your chosen retirement age. Also, you need to think about the definition of incapacity. Some policies offer own occupation cover, which means you'll get a payout if you can't do your specific job. But other policies might offer any occupation cover, which only pays out if you can't do any job at all.
Okay, so I just need to worry about when the payments start, how much they're going to pay out, and how long they're going to pay out for, right?
You've got it, yes. And no, you need to choose those, but you also need to think about your provider, the product, the premium type, indexation, which ensures your benefits are kept up with inflation. Very important. And then there are additional options such as waiver of premium, GIOs, fracture cover, hospitalisation benefits, and so on.
My God, are you serious? This is too much. It just seems like a lot of different options to keep track of.
Yes, but this is all very important stuff to consider when taking out IP. For example, without indexation, your income benefit will probably get eroded by inflation and further rises in living costs over the term of the policy. This will reduce the spending power of your policy benefit. Also, the average duration of an income protection claim is around 7 years, you know. So you need to factor that in. Did you know that if you're off work for more than 2 years, statistically you're unlikely to return? You need to consider that. And did you know that one provider has been paying out a benefit for 35 years to one client?
Jeez, okay. This is way too much to think about. Can you just go over the main points again?
Of course, let's summarise. You need to decide what amount of cover, the deferred period, the benefit period, the additional features like indexation and waiver premium. We can tailor a policy to fit your exact needs and budget.
Wow, I feel like I'm watching a car crash happening here. It's a little bit painful. So what's going on here?
Yeah, so not going through the process of creating that need with the customer, that core need for that regular income, just lots of jargon, lots of terminology, lots of industry speak, really bamboozling, confusing the customer. And it's just a distinct lack of process. There's no sort of start and finish. It's just a general conversation, which is really leading nowhere.
Yeah, it's clear that the client is not bought into the need
100%.
In this situation. And put like that, it's really easy to see why that sort of conversation is not going to result in a sale or a good outcome for the advisor or the client. And yes, as I mentioned, we have exaggerated things here in case you couldn't tell from watching Tracy there. But what are the key takeaways then for our audience?
I think the key takeaways are really to create that core need in the first place. So relate it back to the customer's goals, establish exactly what it is they're hoping to achieve from coming to get your advice in the first place, and then really create the need around income. So how does income play in the whole advice conversation? What is the income being used to do? Is it, for example, in this scenario, a mortgage situation, the income is being used to get the mortgage. So look at the number of mortgage repayments that are going to need to be made. Go through the budget plan with the customer, create that core need throughout the conversation. Remind the customer that income is being used to get the mortgage in the first place, and then focus on that core need first before you start jumping in with all the technical elements of the product. You've got to get the customer really bought in first around the concept of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, and that need for income and how it relates to their goal before you start talking technical exclusions, limitations, and how the product works.
So start with the why.
Absolutely.
Right. So we've got focus on need rather than product and solution, and we've got keep the language simple.
Super simple.
So it's easy to see how that would help the client in that last scenario. Is there anything else you'd recommend that we see in this scenario that we should avoid?
Yes, so naturally what we've got to be doing is avoiding using very complex explanations around the product initially. So I like this idea, for example, of using you mentioned very simple contextual arguments. I mean, I've referred to income protection in the past as like your own private furlough scheme. So I think it's using very simple examples. And what I also encourage advisors to think about is using examples of how the benefit would actually be used, i.e., to keep the lights on, to stock the fridge, to keep you in the home, all those things that generally matter to people, because conceptually most people have this optimism bias that we talked about, so they don't think they're going to need to rely on these products in the first instance. So when you get down to those core objectives, not just paying the mortgage, which, let's be honest with you, isn't that important to most people, it's about doing those key core things that people need and just not bombarding them with too much information, allowing them time to process, allowing them time to understand what you're doing and act a bit more assumptively.
Great. So sounds simple, and yes, it's easy to see how it will be effective, and worth saying at this point that we'll be showing a role play at the very end of this session with all of it coming together to show how it should happen. So let's look at the second of our 4 role plays today. So this time it's time to remove all of the emotion and get talking with our client. Let's take a look at how this plays out.
Welcome, Stevie. Thank you for coming in today. Now that we've arranged your mortgage, we need to protect you from that debt. We need to talk about insurance. Let's start talking about your income protection.
Okay.
Income protection insurance is an insurance contract that is designed to provide a regular replacement income if you find yourself unable to work due to illness or injury. The policy typically covers up to 60% of your gross income and is paid monthly as a net figure. This income can be used to cover all your normal essential outgoings. Policy pays out after a specified chosen deferred period. The deferred period is the waiting period before the benefit begins from when you find yourself unable to work. You can choose deferment periods of 4, 8, 13, 26, 52, 104 and 260 weeks. The chosen deferred period is often linked to either your sick pay entitlement or the amount of your savings you have to fall back on. As I'm sure you're already aware, the longer the deferred period, the lower the premium. The shorter the deferred period, the more expensive the cover.
Right.
The cost also depends on your age, your health, your occupation, how much you earn, how long you need the cover for, and how long you want the plan to pay out for. As an indication, a 35-year-old office worker who does not smoke and needs a replacement income of £2,000 a month with a 3-month deferred period might pay around £50 a month. You should consider the benefit period, which is how long you need the plan to pay out for in years. This could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or until your anticipated retirement age. You also need to decide the definition of incapacity, whether your own occupation or any occupation cover. Own occupation cover pays out if you can't perform your specific job, while any occupation cover pays out if you can't do any job at all.
Okay.
Additional features include indexation, which adjusts your benefit for inflation, waiver of premium, which means you don't pay premiums while you're claiming, and guaranteed insurability, which allows you to increase your cover at a later stage without need for any further medical underwriting. For example, if you have a policy covering £2,000 per month with a 3-month deferment period and you become unable to work due to illness, you would begin receiving monthly payments after 3 months. These payments would continue until you're able to return to work or until the end of the benefit period.
Got it. Riveting stuff.
If you recover and return to work, the payments would stop. If your policy includes a waiver of premium, you would not have to pay the premiums while you're claiming benefits.
Okay.
Right, please take your time to review the details. Feel free to contact me if you have any further questions. Remember, this isn't a mandatory policy at all, so you can take it or leave it really. But it would be good if you at least thought about it, okay?
Yeah, well, I guess, thanks.
Right. So that was quite the monotonous protection pitch. Lots of facts, lots of information for the client. And whilst it was clearly explained, it wasn't at all engaging. Not an easy listen for the client at all.
I mean, factually, like you say, factually correct. There was nothing wrong with what the advisor was saying, but it was clear they had no vested interest in what was actually happening. They didn't seem to engage the customer. They weren't reading the room very well. It was more of just like a monotone pitch. And I think the problem there is it's like if you're a customer listening to that, you're not going to see any level of passion or enthusiasm around what's being recommended. I mean, I've said to people in the past that one of the reasons I think I was successful as an advisor was because I genuinely believed in what I was talking about. And it was conveyed in the way I spoke to the customer, because people don't get passionate about things they don't believe in. And I think it's that humanizing of the conversation that is what gets the customer bought into the concept, because you're really demonstrating why you think it's important and that you're trying to do what you can in the client's best interest, rather than just going through a monotone presentation that's really quite boring.
So more emotion in the conversation. So how should advisors do that? Can make it more personal and get that passion across?
Yeah, well, I think there's two key things I'd suggest. One is obviously naturally using the information that you've got at your fingertips. So we're going through a fact-finding process with the customer. We always talk about know your customer, okay? So we collect a lot of information about the customer, and I'm not suggesting that we weaponize that at all. What I'm really saying is you've got everything at your fingertips. You've got all the information around the customer, what they care about, what they choose to spend their money on. I think delving into that a little bit and talking with the customer and getting a bit of feedback from them as to what they care most about. I often talk about this thing about being an ACE advisor. So ask questions, establish concerns, and then educate. The problem is most advisors do the asking the questions, establishing the concerns, and then forget to do the education bit. So, be human, educate the customers to what you're recommending and how it's going to help them with the things that they care most about. And then the other thing is not being afraid to let your personality shine through. I often find that advisors are very worried about being themselves in these types of conversations, and I don't think they should be. I think actually that human element is quite endearing, and it's probably what's going to get the customer to be more bought into what you're saying, because they see that you're also a human. You're not just going through the motions. It's not just a process. There's a genuine conversation where you're looking to produce good outcomes and you care about what's going to happen to the customer.
And what about things like storytelling? I mean, that seems like a good way to bring the emotion in, bring it to life for the client, and try and overcome the optimism bias as well.
I think storytelling's imperative. I think storytelling is how we bring these things to life for people. I think we've all got, and we can all recount genuine stories of where we've seen customers suffer hardship or go through things. I think everybody out there that's watching this has probably known someone that's experienced a serious illness or died prematurely. And I think it's about reverting back to those stories, or even probing the customer as to whether they know someone in that situation, because invariably they will. And often that's enough just to spark that thought in their minds as to what happened to that family when that situation occurred, because they'll see the benefit of what you're recommending. But I just think, as you say, it's that conversational piece. The problem with that one is it's more like a presentation, not a conversation. It's almost like a very cold interrogation rather than actual discussion with the customers to what's going to benefit them. And I think that's what advisors need to avoid. I understand, particularly if you're one of those advisors that's working through a script, it's very easy to almost sound a little bit monotone. So for those advisors who are watching that are heavily scripted, for example, in the way they do things, just remember to add a bit of your personality to the conversation.
Yeah, and it would be remiss of me at this point not to mention the Seven Families stories, which if you don't have anything to draw on yourself, you can't think of anything, you can refer to those stories. They're not branded, they're free to use, and they're available on the IPTF website and YouTube channel. They really focus on income protection rather than one provider or another. And also, just to give a podcast plug here, I don't know if you've heard of Let's Talk IP.
No idea.
Small podcast. It just reminds me of the episode we did with Julie Botha from Vitality, where she touched on how to use stories, because I think some advisors are never quite sure how to introduce them, how they might feel a bit of a sales tool, a bit too obvious. And she talked about sending them on after the conversation, just as a sort of confirmation of the discussion that you'd had, which I thought was a great idea. It
was a very clever idea, and I ironically hadn't thought of it myself, but this idea of then, almost applauding the customer for making the right decision, and then using the videos like the Seven Family videos to just kind of like really reiterate and hone on the point that you've made a very smart decision, and just to remind you of the benefit and the difference it makes. Here's a few examples that might help compound the decision you just made for yourself and for your family, and how it's going to benefit you moving forward. I think that's a very powerful tool. And I think at that point as well, if it's once the customer's already agreed to go ahead, I think it becomes less about selling and more about sort of applauding the customer's smart choices, which I think is a nicer way of doing it. Yeah, it's definitely a nice touch. And again, it's a really easy thing to do once you think about it. But it can make a massive difference to the outcomes for you and your client. Okay, so it's time for role play 3, where we're going to completely forget that our client is a real person. Let's have a watch.
Oh, hello. Thank you for coming, dear. I'm so glad you could make it. Let's talk about protecting your income, shall we?
Sure. I really want to understand my options.
Well, excellent. I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're definitely going to set you up with some cover. And I'll tell you why. Did you know that 1 in 3 people have been able to work for at least 6 months due to illness or injury before they reach retirement age? Now that could be you. Today or tomorrow. Then what do you do? How are you going to look after your family? What responsible person would allow that to happen without some cover in place?
Gosh, yeah. Well, yeah, it's not the nicest thing to think about.
Exactly. And that's why income protection insurance is so critical. Without it, you can end up losing your home. You might not be able to make ends meet. Your family could starve. You can't allow that, can you? That would be awful. How could you allow it? Especially if you can take the cover to stop it happening.
Well, no, I mean, of course not. I'd hate to put my family in that situation. So can you tell me more about what it is that you're recommending? I need to know what my options are.
Oh, of course, dear. It's really quite simple when you get the hang of it. But you know what? Let me worry about the options. The only thing you need to know is that the policy pays out a regular income if you can't work due to illness or injury. So at least, thank God, you'll be able to keep paying your bills. Think of it like a safety net to catch you when you fall.
Right, but what are the details that I should be considering?
Oh, don't worry about the details, we'll get to that. Just trust me. And you know without this, you're leaving yourself and your family incredibly vulnerable. Just think how hard it would be to get by without your income. You wouldn't be able to live with yourself, would you, if you put your family in that position, knowing that you could have saved your family and didn't. I couldn't live with myself.
So you have this cover then?
No, but that's not the point, is it? I'm not you, am I? I mean, I don't have your bills and your family to take care of like you. I mean, look, you don't want to be one of those people who regrets not having coverage, do you?
No, but...
Excellent. Let's get you signed up right now. Not a moment to waste. Who knows what will happen? Listen, I've got a policy in mind that covers 60% of your income and kicks in after just 3 months if you can't work. It's the best decision you'll make for your family's future. So let's get this set up right now. Trust me, dear. You don't want to wait until it's too late. Imagine the peace of mind that you'll have knowing that your family's protected. How clever you'll feel. The alternative just doesn't bear thinking about, does it? I mean, you don't want to be that client, do you? I mean, no, of course not. Let's get started with the paperwork right now.
Hang on, I'm not entirely sure about this. I need to know more about what I'm signing up for here, and then I need some time to think about it.
There's nothing really to think about, is there? You care for your family, don't you? You love them, don't you? What on earth do you think about? Look, the statistics speak for themselves. You need this coverage. Full stop. And the sooner you get it, the better. It's a no-brainer, really. So let's not waste any more precious time. Let's go ahead and get this done now. You'll thank me later, trust me.
I really can't make this decision now. I need to go.
All right. But remember, the longer you wait, the more you're risking. It's a very irresponsible way to behave, if you ask me. I mean, so when you're ready to do the right thing for your family, call me and we'll get you set up with the Rolls-Royce package. You'll be back.
Wow, there's a lot to say about this one, mainly that I'm just very glad I'm not really the client in this scenario.
I'm surprised.
It was very patronising, very pushy.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that type of approach would ever be successful. Not to mention, it doesn't exactly feel like it exemplifies consumer duty.
No.
What are your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say, I hope that these conversations aren't taking place. Unfortunately, I have in the past heard a couple like this. I think the problem here is what's going on in this particular case study is you've got an advisor who misunderstands their role as an advisor. And I think we see this a lot where you've got advisors who believe that the value of what they do is that they know something the customer doesn't know. And it's almost like, well, you're paying me or you're coming to see me because I'm an oracle in this particular situation. So I'm going to chat to you in a very condescending way and assume you don't know what you're talking about. And I understand why, because we don't learn about money at school. And this is a big problem. This is why we have optimism bias and all these other issues, because we don't understand money. We don't learn about it at school. But I personally believe that the role of an advisor is actually to disseminate that. The role of the advisor is to do the educational bit that sits behind it. And I think this case study demonstrates very easily how an advisor can almost assume the role of the authority figure, but without understanding that their job is not to know something the customer doesn't know and use it against them, but actually to break down that knowledge gap. And it's only when you've done that educational bit that you'll get the client truly engaged in what it is you're trying to suggest, because it appears as if you're doing it for their best interest, not that you're trying to pitch or sell a product that you know something about and that they don't. Yeah, the condescending side of things is unpleasant to watch, very unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, it also shows a total lack of awareness of your client's feelings and their understanding of things. So definitely one to avoid.
100%.
Right, time for the final role play, which is called the afterthought advisor.
Congratulations, Joe. We've received your mortgage offer back from the lender. It's all been approved. Great news, isn't it? I'm really glad we got all that sorted out for you.
Thank you so much. It feels so good to have this all sorted now. We just can't wait to move in.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Best part of my job. Although now we've taken care of the mortgage, we really need to look at protecting it. Obviously, it's a really big debt. So we really need to talk about the insurances you might want to take. We'll start with income protection insurance.
Income protection insurance? I'm not sure I've heard of that. Is that PPI?
No. Very different. Income protection insurance ensures that if you're unable to work due to illness or injury, you'd still receive a regular income. It's designed to cover your mortgage payments and all your other living expenses during that time, so it's really useful.
Is it mandatory? Do I have to have it?
No, it's not mandatory. All these insurances are optional, but income protection's really important, so you ought to look at that one.
But if it's so important, why are we only talking about it now? This all feels a bit salesy to me. Do you make money out of this?
Well, yeah, but that's not why I'm suggesting you have it. It's just that it's really important to protect yourself from the mortgage debt.
I get that. I'm just not sure if I want to commit to this right now. I've stretched my finances to reach that higher borrowing amount, and until I've moved in and I know what my bills are going to be, I'm not sure if I can afford it, and it's not really a priority, especially if it's not mandatory.
I completely understand, Joe. It's important to prioritise what's most pressing for you and not get overwhelmed. As you say, income protection's entirely optional and something you can consider when you're ready.
Thanks for your understanding. As a general guide, how much should I expect to pay? As I say, I've already stretched my finances to get that higher borrowing amount.
It varies based on a range of factors like your age, health, occupation. I can't really give you a figure as there's too many variables, but it's something you probably need. So do you want me to run through some quotes with you now? They're short-term options too. They're much cheaper.
I don't know. I hadn't really planned for this extra expense.
No, of course. I don't want to pressure you in any way. I'll take a look at some options and I'll email them over to you later. You can go over them in your own time. Take your time to review them, and if you've got any questions or you want to discuss it further, just give me a call. We can schedule another meeting if you want to.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. So that felt somewhat inevitable. For the avoidance of doubt, tell us what went wrong there, Matt.
So this is an advisor bringing up protection as a bolt-on option. I see this an awful lot in my coaching work. Generally speaking, most people have a preconceived idea that the customers come to them for something else. So we'll use mortgages as an example. And I often talk about this, and I've done it recently in a post where, you speak to advisors and they'll say, but the customer came to me for a mortgage, they didn't come to me for protection. And I have to sort of almost re-educate them a little bit and say, actually, the customer did not come to you for a mortgage. The goal is something else entirely, i.e. to buy a home. The mortgage just happens to be the product or the solution being used to achieve that, in the same way that the income that's being used to get the mortgage is something that's also being used. And I think actually the mortgage is the means to the end. The goal is not to buy the home, not to get the mortgage, but to buy the home. And the challenge in this particular instance is that the advisor is focused very heavily on that. The bit that they think the customer wants, i.e. the mortgage. That's what they came to me for. And the problem there is that when you do that and you almost sideline protection, particularly income protection and the role it plays in achieving that same goal, then when you do bring it up, it starts to feel like a sales pitch. If you're a customer, imagine you're going through something and you've just bought something, and then someone starts saying, oh, have you thought about the optional warranty? Have you thought about this? The first thing you do is shut them down because you feel like you're being persuaded. Whereas if someone says to you, right, as part of this advice process, we're going to be looking at getting you the mortgage, but also protecting the very means that you've got to be able to get the mortgage and repay it, given that the goal is to buy the home, correct? So establishing the real core nature of the goal with the customer, and then explaining that the advice includes various elements as to how you're going to achieve that. That's a different way of doing it. This is very much what I see a lot of in the industry, where customer goes through a process, whether that be mortgage or wealth or whatever, then protection's brought up because everyone has to do it under consumer duty. We have to be talking about it now, and we have to put it in our processes. But the problem is it's done as an afterthought. And when it's done as an afterthought, the customer is not going to be engaged. Don't get me wrong, some will, but you'll find they won't be very happy. Chances are they'll cancel later because they won't see the value in it. And at the end of the day, the question you've got to ask is this: if it was that important, you'd have brought it up earlier, right? And that's kind of what's going wrong in this situation, that if you do it like this, if you do it later in the game when the client's got what they want from you, they're not going to see the imperative. They're not going to want to do anything.
Yeah, so the answer obviously is to make it a priority as an advisor and bring it up earlier. So I guess the ultimate goal as well is not just to get the house, but to keep the house, right? So
absolutely.
So what about those who are at the start of their house buying journey, or they're looking into a mortgage because they're planning ultimately to buy a house or to buy a new build home? I know we've touched on this in the podcast, but what's the angle that you should be highlighting if your customer's in that situation?
Well, anybody who's looking to buy a home, remortgage, refinance, it is the income that's being leveraged and used to get that liability, to get that debt. And I think we often forget that. So if someone's coming to you, and there's a couple of really great tips here, and we talked, like you said, we talked about the Let's Talk RP podcast, so make sure you watch those. But in the one, we talked about this idea that it's really important as advisors, if someone's coming to you that when they want to get onto the property ladder, that actually you ring fence and secure their ability to do that, to get to the next stage of the process. So that is protecting the deposit sources that they're accumulating, their credit score, which is obviously going to give them access to top shelf mortgages, and the very income that ultimately you're going to need as an advisor to leverage to get them that loan. So by protecting those three sources, what we're doing is we're getting someone mortgage ready, so to speak. We're putting them in a position where when they're at the time that they can borrow enough and they've got the right income sources, they can actually come to you and do it. So I really think it's an important thing to do for advisors to recognize. The other is actually when someone comes in, and let's say it's a new build and they want to buy a home, really important to do that income protection early on, because once someone exchanges contracts, they're legally bound to buy the home. And if we don't protect the very income sources, if something goes wrong and they start to eat into the deposit, or the credit score takes a nosedive, or they lose the income sources we're using to get the mortgage and the mortgage falls through, you're going to not only lose that customer and the mortgage, but actually the customer's still legally bound to buy the house. So from a consumer duty perspective, that's a very, very poor outcome. So I would encourage every advisor that sees a customer come through the door, that even before you start worrying about submitting mortgage applications or arranging those liabilities, that you protect the very means by which someone's able to borrow in the first place. And there's another reason why that's really beneficial for businesses, which is if the mortgage doesn't go ahead, let's say, for example, they get gazumped or the house is taken off the market or something. If you haven't yet done that, you've lost the customer. Right? But it's not as if they still don't need the income. They still need the income. We talked about it earlier. Income is the bedrock on which anyone survives or does anything, right? So naturally, by doing that, you've actually ring-fenced the customer. You've kept them in your fold. And when they do find another home and they're ready to mortgage again, you've got them in a position where they can actually do that, and with you as well. So you haven't just lost the business. I wonder how many firms lose customers in that situation where customers inquired about a mortgage, and for whatever reason, it doesn't go ahead, whereas they could have actually protected their income sources, locked them in as a customer, and not missed out on that opportunity as well. Great outcomes for everyone.
Absolutely. Right, so if we look back across the role plays that we've seen today, we've highlighted the need to talk about need rather than product, to use simple language, to keep things relatable, to use emotion and bring in storytelling, to bring the protection need to life, to avoid patronising your client, to avoid the hard sell, and most of all, to share your passion for protecting your client as an advisor. So shall we see how this all comes together then in our final role play, which again, it's simplified, but it shows you how you can avoid these common mistakes. Let's take a look.
Welcome, Hannah. Thank you for coming in today. Today we're going to focus on what we can do to make sure that you and your family are financially resilient. How does that sound?
That sounds brilliant. What I wouldn't give to feel more financially resilient.
I know exactly how you feel. I think we all would, right? It's actually a lot simpler and more cost effective than you might think. What I'm going to do first is identify your needs and offer a solution while making sure you get exceptional value for money.
Thank you so much. That'd be great.
Right, well, let me start by what I would argue is the most essential product that you could possibly look at. Looking at the budget planner and your lifestyle costs, you've told me about already, is it fair to say that you're totally reliant on your income?
Oh, absolutely.
Here's a question for you, Hannah. What would happen if your income stopped tomorrow? How long would it take before you had a big problem on your hands?
It actually wouldn't take that long.
So we're in agreement. If your income stopped, it would be a major issue. So what we need to do is ring fence it for you. Let me be frank, you can't borrow money if you haven't got an income coming in, let alone pay all your essential bills and support your lifestyle. You need money coming in each month. Without it, life would be very grim very quickly. Your income might stop, but the bills aren't going to.
That's very true.
So you need a plan to protect your income, as it's the foundation of everything. The plan we use in this situation is called income protection.
That sounds really good, but isn't it really expensive?
Not at all, it's exceptional value. I can already see that you get good sick pay from work. So the good news is it's likely to be more cost effective for you. We can delay how quickly you need that plan to kick in. It's really important that if you leave this job, you let me know, as I'm going to dovetail this policy with your current employer's benefit. Not all employers are this generous, so I'd probably allow just 3 to 5% of your total salary, as this is likely going to get you a plan that's going to provide cover for your entire working life.
3% of my income to protect the same income? It can't be that cheap.
Yep, it certainly can be. And as I say, that would usually be for a full term plan that lasts until you retire or you stop working. That's the one I'd recommend, given the fact that we've identified you need an income for at least the next 35 years. Looking at what you earn and your outgoings, I recommend that we put in place a plan that's going to pay £2,000 a month, and it kicks in after 3 months when your employer's sick pay ends. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think we'd be okay on £2,000 a month.
Great. We'll add on indexation and make sure that we speak on an annual basis. That way we can make sure the level of cover you've got is appropriate for your needs. Indexation is going to provide you with some kind of protection on the impacts of inflation. Without it, rising costs of living can eat away and erode the spending power of your £2,000 benefit. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't believe how much my bills have gone up recently.
Tell me about it. And that's why we need to make sure that you're protected from that moving forward, and that we regularly review your cover. We'll sort out review date in a moment, but you should always get in contact if you've got any major changes. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
I want to make sure you understand how essential your income is and why I'm arranging income protection for you. Have you got any questions about what I've recommended?
No, you've gone through everything so well, and I do genuinely understand just how important having an income is. I didn't even know you could get a product like this, so yeah, thank you. It's definitely a no-brainer.
So that was definitely the most pleasant to watch, and hopefully it's inspired advisors watching at home to review their own process, to think about the way they approach this, put themselves in their client's shoes, and ensure that they're setting themselves up for a successful conversation. Thank you, Matt, for being here
Pleasure.
today and for your input on the role plays.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Next, we mentioned the 7 Families content available for use by all advisors, so it feels only right to share our 2-minute film with you that sees the 7 families share their experiences to demonstrate that it could happen to you.
Had a massive brainstem stroke. Well, he was 42. You know, I was 37 when it happened, and you don't expect it, because when it does come, let me tell you, your world comes crashing down, and it isn't pleasant.
So not only are you not well, you've lost your income, and then you're having to think, well, something I never would have had to do before was apply for benefits. and then going through that whole process is just like kind of soul destroying, really.
We were going to go off and travel around Europe on motorbikes. We got about as far as the borders, and unfortunately I lost control of my bike. I ended up going across a dual carriageway and hitting a car. I was transferred to the National Spinal Unit in Glasgow, where I was there for the next 11 months and 1 week. Got no sensation from about there downwards. Didn't have anything before this happened at all. I was reliant on my works insurance that I had, but being as I was actually on a career break when the accident happened, it didn't count. So I was kind of without anything at all.
All of a sudden you're told you can't work.
You go from having, say, 2 wages coming in the house, and then all of a sudden it was 1. And, you know, we're a family of 5, 6 including the dog. You know, we've got to buy school uniforms, we've got to buy them clothes, we've got to buy them, you know, we've got to do all the day-to-day
Those things don't stop just because one of you is not well enough to work.
And it's not a case
and it's an
of
added pressure on your partner.
I wish we'd kind of put other things in place. We were more concerned with going to work and doing up the house, and we honestly did not think that anything like this could possibly happen. And it did. It could happen to anybody.
A reminder that the 7 Families content can be accessed via the IPTF website. Now, on to our final segment today, where we're going to look at the consequences of getting your advice process wrong. We've hung on to Matthew Chapman, and we're delighted to be joined by Angela Davidson from Mortgage Intelligence. Welcome, Angela.
Hi there.
So thanks for joining us today. We've been looking so far at how to get that advice conversation right, albeit in quite a light-hearted way, but we've invited you along to discuss some of the examples and consequences of getting it wrong. So let's start with the importance of why we should start our conversations with long-term IP, and as Matt says, ski downhill from there. So I believe you've got a client case study that you can share with us that highlights why that's so important.
Yeah, I have. So this is a good few years ago now. My husband's also in financial services, and a man contacted him and said, look, I really need to have access to my pension, and my husband's a pension specialist. So can I come and talk to you? And my husband was chatting away with this I'm going to say poor man, because he was 51, and about 3 years prior to that he'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and consequently he needed help from a professional to be able to get access to his pension at the age of 51. Now, you know, we all know that has real consequences. But the reason he needed access to that pension was that the state would not provide for him after so long of being ill. They actually said, no, you're fit enough to do something. He wasn't. His consultant said, you will never work again. And as my husband has said so many times, this man couldn't even hold a bone in his body still sitting in front of him. There was nothing that man could do. And he was subsequently sort of released from work as well. Right. So thankfully, Michael did get him access, because if you're really poorly, that's a reason to get into your pension pot early. However, he did say, how long will this last if I get £1,000 a month? He still had a mortgage. He still had teenagers at home. He still had all of those responsibilities. And Michael worked out probably about 10 years, you will be able to take funds at £1,000 a month. And his words were, that's fine, I won't be here by then. And it was that moment, I was like, God, if we'd had income protection, surely that would have been an absolute saving grace for him and his family. His pension would have continued to build and grow, and he wouldn't have depleted the resources that he did have. And I think the stress of that financial situation he was in would have had consequences on his health as well as, the Parkinson's that he had.
Yeah. Matt, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, Angela's absolutely right. It's not even about the breathing space as well. I guess let's think about it from the point of view of the loss of the potential value of the pension fund, because we all know that the value of a pension fund and someone's retirement income is based on how long you can leave those funds to grow and mature and the compound interest that you see on it. So a lot of the work I'm doing with wealth advisors is focusing on that, which is actually, it's not even the loss of the income that's the major problem. It's the loss of the value or the potential value of that fund over the duration of the investment. And I think this is what we're all forgetting, that the investment in income protection is minuscule in comparison to potential losses. And I think when we start to rethink of it that way, and we start to see actually when we invest in these types of solutions, particularly full-term income protection, that's a great way to safeguard everything else that we care about. The future of our retirement income, the properties that we've taken on, the lifestyles that we covet so much. And I think we've got to stop looking at it like it's a sort of an insurance product and more like a means to an end. It's sort of like a tool for financial resilience to enable us to do what we want to do and achieve our financial goals in life.
Yeah, I think it's worth citing here some research. It was back in 2016, but I know it's still quoted by a lot of people in the industry, including Johnny Timpson. Was research by the TUC, which cited that 1 in 8 people have to retire early because of ill health. And I think, as we've said, the knock-on effect there on your long-term financial planning, your pension, is devastating, isn't it? And it really knocks that sort of optimism bias that many people have on the head there. So we often talk about the power of stories at IPTF, so including our 7 Families resources and our case studies. I believe you've got another story for us, Angela, about a friend of your family to share.
I have, and I mean, it is a really sad story, and I don't like to talk about it without thinking this is to inspire people. It is to make people realise that life is cruel sometimes. And it was a family friend of ours. We were with them one evening on a Saturday night singing and dancing, and on the Monday, he had a stroke in the worst possible place, and that is at the base of your brain, because what it did, it left him completely paralysed and could only move his eyes for the rest of his life. So yes, no, by using your eyes to indicate one way or the other. And yes, that is incredibly, incredibly rare. It's called locked-in syndrome. And nobody wants to ever think about that. And I think sometimes when we're talking, or a lot of advisors are talking about income protection, they're talking about, oh, if you broke your ankle, if you did this, or you had a short time off work, which is more likely to happen. But I think we've got to think about things that can put us out of work for a long, long time. And our friend still had a brilliant brain, but was only able to communicate in that way for the remainder of his life. Now, I don't know their financial circumstances. That wasn't something we got into, but income protection would never have taken away the pain of that awful diagnosis and the rest of their lives having to cope with it. But at least the family would have been comfortable, and I think it's that we always talk about peace of mind, but it's that peace of mind that if the financials are in place, then you can have these, whatever is down the path for us, nobody knows, but having that financial security is just so important.
Yeah, I think as well, if we think about it, we probably all know someone, we've all got a story to tell, and I think using that as part of your advice process, asking your client, do you know someone, can really bring it to life, instead of maybe using scary stats. I don't know what you think, Matt.
I completely agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think personal stories, asking the customer to recount someone that they know that's been through a similar situation, or know someone who's been diagnosed with cancer as an example, because I think we all genuinely all know people that have died prematurely or suffered a serious illness. And I think what that's really doing is helping the customer to overcome their own optimism bias around these types of things. I think one of the things I'd really love to say, because we're talking about how we encourage advisors to sustain full-term recommendations as opposed to defaulting to short-term. And don't get me wrong, I recognise that short-term plans are always better than nothing. I understand that. But one of the mistakes that advisors often make in this situation is this idea that they almost abandon their own recommendations. They abandon their own advice because they've spent all this time identifying with the customer the importance or the need for regular income throughout the customer's life. So a wealth advisor might be looking at someone's retirement income or a pension provision. And of course, they're mapping that out in their cash flow models. And they're saying, well, you need to make these contributions up to this age. And then they've done the hard work. Mortgage advisors are the same. When you're recommending a mortgage term of 30 years, 25 years, 35 years, you're doing all the groundwork to explain the customer needs to make these repayments over 30 years, for example. And then what happens is the advisor gets to the point where they present the full-term income protection contract. And naturally, their initial reaction themselves is to suffer from their own premium bias. They present it, they think it's expensive, and they end up starting to default to short-term options by trying to almost encourage the customer to take something rather than nothing. In doing so, what they're actually doing is undermining everything they've just done. And it's really important that what you do when you present that full-term option, you explain the value of the full-term option, using these stories, using these examples, reminding the customer the importance of knowing they've got that income for life. Because we don't just need it for 2 years. We don't need it for 2 years or 1 year or 5 years. We need an income for the rest of our lives, okay? And so it's really important to continue to sustain that value around that recommendation. And only if you've exhausted all the other options, your age banded, your benefit reductions, extended deferred period, all these different things that you can do to bring that investment down, only then would you default to a short-term option once you've exhausted all those. That's kind of my opinion around how we keep those products up at full term.
Totally agree.
There you go. Look at that.
I was going to say, Angela, you must agree as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, Matt's saying that a lot of advisors start with full-term IP and then talk themselves out of it. Some don't even talk about full-term IP, and that's the thing. You're like, oh, please, that's got to be the go-to. That's what you would want for your family.
Exactly.
Talk about it and have a grown-up conversation.
The thing is, there's so many touch points in the advice process where that full-term needs obvious. If you're looking at someone's budget plan, you look at how much money they've got coming in and how much money they've got going out. It's not as if that's going to stop in 2 years, is it? Those bills carry on regardless. Again, when you're doing the mortgage illustration, you're going through it with the customer, you're talking about the number of monthly payments the customer's got to make. So straight away, Gary talked about that last year. It's the same kind of concept, this idea of really honing in on this income need does not go away. It never goes away. Even when we stop working, hence the pension conversation we're just having, that income need never goes away. The bills never stop even when we do. But I think what we've got to do is, as an advice community, is always start, like we said, with that blue sky option and then ski downhill. But the problem is a lot of advisors, you're rightly saying, they either don't start at the top of the hill in the first place, or if they do go skiing, they're going down a diamond black run straight off a cliff. We've got to remember, the idea here is to keep the customer up where they need to be by giving them the bare minimum at least for as long as they're going to need it for. And only then can we feel confident that we're giving people the financial security that you were just talking about.
So we've highlighted, obviously, via your stories, the consequences of not doing that. So key takeaway for today, I guess it's start with the long-term IP. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I would say start with a full-term income protection. Don't just drop off a cliff. Make sure you keep it up there. Just relate it back to the customer's goals and objectives. Because from my perspective, if you know what the customer's goals and objective is, to get this house, keep this house, it's a family home. Great, okay. My job is to make sure you can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure not only do we get you the mortgage, but I'm going to make sure you've always got the income that you can pay for it as well. So it's all these types of things. It's really honing in on what matters to the customer and then using those personal stories that Angela was talking about to really bring the need to life, but not in a scare tactic, not in a sort of a statistical way, in a very humanized way where we can actually make it far more relatable for the customer.
Anything you would add, Angela? I mean, you've been working with advisors for a long time, trying to get them to do just this.
I have. I think it's the value of full-term IP, and not to forget, I know we've done this before in previous years where we show the monetary amount over that term. If you're going to have so much a month, potentially for the next 30 years, look at the value of that compared to how much you're going to pay for it. And pound for pound, long-term IP is just so much better value. And it's there for a reason.
Angela's spot on, absolutely spot on. At the end of the day, the value is the point here. I think that's probably the key takeaway for anyone watching this, is the value of protecting your income and having financial security and income security for life versus the cost of doing that is negligible. You see, we in the advice community, we perceive income protection, particularly full term, to be expensive. It is not. And I think in terms of value add, I often say to people, imagine that you're having a conversation with someone, you said, if we could guarantee your income for the rest of your life, but you had to take a 5% pay cut, would you do it? Now, most people would say yes, because it's the income security they value over the amount. Well, that's income protection. That's full-term income protection. So again, it's the positioning piece that Angela's talking about, where you can really add the value and demonstrate pound for pound why it's more cost effective to invest in something that's going to ring fence your income versus the potential losses you might experience.
So if you're an advisor watching this today, and what we're suggesting is the opposite of what you currently do, you start at the bottom of the hill at the moment, how do you turn that around? How do we give people the tools as part of Income Protection Action Week?
Yeah.
What's the next thing they need to do to start turning their advice process around, to start at the top of the hill?
I think you need to be very confident, first of all, in the value of what you're offering. I think we, as advisors, particularly those who are out there watching this that don't currently do this, you're probably your own worst enemy. You're probably undermining the advice that you're giving and the value of that advice. I think if you're going through an advice process, whether that be wealth, whether that be mortgage, or even protection only, if you've identified through the budget planner or the cash flow model that the customer needs an income, and they need that income for life, which, let's be honest, they're all going to do, because that's the reality of human condition. So you're going to identify the customer needs an income, then all you need to do is recommend a product that meets that basic need. That is it. You don't need to worry about the fluff or selling the concept of it. It's a case of there is an identified need, make a recommendation. What it costs is what it costs, right? That's it. And I think that's the advice I'd give you, is just present it, have absolute conviction in what it is you're doing. And when you present it to the customer, I promise you'll be pleasantly surprised. For those advisors out there who don't do it, often it's your own fear of what you're going to say to the customer that's the problem, not the customer's perception. As long as you've done the groundwork that Angela talks about, adding the value, then when you present that full-term option, as long as you just present the full-term option and you tell the customer that's what they need, I think you might be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I'm with you. The thing is, not to have your own biases in front of you. Put them to one side and do what you would do for your family member.
To get out of your own way, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you both for your time today. Hopefully we've inspired some advisors watching to think about the way that they're working and be confident enough to start at the top of the hill in their conversations.
Thanks for having us.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Matt and Angela for joining me in the studio, and Tracy, Anthony and Hannah for helping so valiantly with our role plays. Don't forget to register for tomorrow's session if you haven't already. We'll be considering the needs of different types of clients, how to create content to help grow your business on social media, and backed by popular demand, we'll be welcoming Gary Waters back for some coaching on objection handling. And one last final reminder, share your key takeaways, what you're enjoying and what you'll do differently because of IPAW on social. Remember to tag IPTF and use the Because of IPAW and IPAW 2024 hashtags, as we'd love to see what you're all up to. That really is it for our Tuesday session. Thanks for tuning in.